This is an unofficial reading of Overlord by Kugane Maruyama, read by Ava Skull. Prologue. Before two young girls stood a figure in full plate armor brandishing a sword. The blade swung, sparkling in the sunlight as if to say that taking their lives in a single stroke would be an act of mercy. The girl shut her eyes. She didn't want to be biting her lower lip. She just had no choice but to accept what was about to happen. If she had even a little power, she probably would have been able to shove the figure away and escape. But she was powerless. And there was only one ending. She was going to die. The blade came down. The pain still hadn't come. She unscrunched her eyes. The first thing she saw was the sword, stopped mid-swing. The next was the figure holding the sword. The knight was practically frozen, looking at something off to her side. His unprotected stance manifested his internal shock. The girl turned to follow his line of sight, and saw despair. It was darkness. A patch of raven black, ultra-thin but so deep it seemed as if it went on forever. It was an oval rising up out of the ground, its bottom half cut off. It was a curious sight, but at the same time it made her feel indescribably uneasy. A door was what came to mind when she looked at it. A heartbeat later, she would be proven correct. Something glided out of the darkness, and when she saw what it was, a dry shriek escaped her lips. A human would have no chance against this being. Hazy red light flickered flame-like in the vacant orbs of a bleached white skull. The gaze was trained unfeelingly on the girls as if they were live prey. Skinless, fleshless hands, both sublime and terrible, clutched a staff so gorgeous it seemed to be the concentration of all the world's beauty. It was as if death had donned an intricately ornamented raven-black robe and had been born into this world from another along with the darkness. The air instantly froze. At the entrance of the Absolute, even time seemed to stop. As though her soul had been taken, the girl forgot to breathe. With no sense of time, inhaling was difficult, and she nauseously gulped for air. A messenger from beyond has come to lure us away. But that didn't seem right. The night behind them had frozen as well. She heard an exhalation that could not even be called a scream. But whether it had been her trembling little sister, or the knight with the sword before them, she didn't know. Death's fingers, of which only the bones picked clean were left, stretched out slowly and then violently snatched at, not the girls, but the knight. She wanted to look away, but she was too scared. She had the feeling that if she did look away, the monster would transform into something even more horrible. Grasp heart. Death incarnate made a clenching motion. The metal clanged noisily next to the girl. She was scared to take her eyes off Death. But she lost to the tiny bit of curiosity still dwelling inside her and looked at the knight lying face down on the ground. He wasn't moving. He was dead. Yes, dead. The danger threatening to take her life had evaporated in a laughably simple way, but she couldn't celebrate. Death had only assumed a more concentrated form. Sensing the fear in her gaze with its entire body, Death moved toward her. The darkness that had been contained within her field of vision began to expand. It's going to swallow us up. She hugged her little sister close. The idea of running away didn't even occur to her anymore. If her opponent had been a human, she might have been able to act on the faint hope of, maybe. But the being before her had dashed that hope as if it were nothing. Please, let it not hurt, at least. That was the most she could hope for now. Her little sister clung to her waist. She wanted to save her, but she couldn't. All she could do was apologize for her powerlessness and pray that they would die together so she wouldn't be lonely. And then... Chapter 1. The End and the Beginning. In the year 2138, there exists something called a DMMORPG. This stands for Drive Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game, while connected via an intercranial nanocomputer network called a neural-nano interface, which combines the best of cyber and nanotechnology. Players experience physical sensations as if they were really inhabiting an imaginary world. In other words, you play as if you're actually in the world of the game. And among all the various DMMORPGs that have been developed, one stood above the rest: Yggdrasil. It had been released 12 years earlier, in 2126, by a Japanese developer who had been waiting for just the right moment. Compared to other DMMORPGs at the time, Yggdrasil gave players an incredible amount of freedom. For example, consider the class system, a fundamental element of character customization. Counting the advanced classes as well as the base ones, there were well over 2,000. Since each class only had 15 levels, players could have 7 or more classes by the time they hit the overall level cap of 100. As long as they met the basic requirements, they could dabble as they pleased. Though it would be inefficient, a player could acquire 100 classes at level 1 if they wanted to. In other words, the system was such that, unless they were deliberately created that way, no two characters would ever be the same. Then, by using the creator's toolkit, sold separately, players could edit the appearance of their weapons and armor, as well as the advanced settings of their in-game residencies. The environment awaiting players who'd ventured into this world was enormous. In fact, there were 9 worlds: Asgard, Alfheim, Vanaheim, Nidavellir, Midgard, Jotunheim, Niflheim, Helheim, and Muspelheim. A vast world, a staggering number of classes, and graphics that could be tweaked to one's heart's content. It was precisely the amount of customization that poured nitroglycerin onto the Japanese creative spirit that led to the game's explosive popularity. It got to the point where in Japan the word DMMORPG was practically synonymous with Yggdrasil. But that was all in the past now. In the center of the room, a gigantic circular table shone with an obsidian gleam. Around it were 41 magnificent seats. Most of them, however, were empty. Once, all the seats had been filled, but now only 2 figures remained. One wore an extravagant raven-black academic robe with purple and gold trim. The collar was perhaps a bit over-embellished, but strangely it suited the wearer. The bare head of the figure in question had neither skin nor flesh, just bone. Reddish-black flames burned in his gaping eye sockets, and something like a black halo shone behind him. The other one wasn't human either, more of an amorphous black blob, almost like coal tar. His constantly shifting surface meant that he had no fixed shape. The former was an elder lich, an undead being that was what remained of a caster who had pursued magic ability to its extreme, and the most elite type, an overlord. The latter was an elder black ooze, which was a slime race that had some of the most powerful acid abilities in the game. The various types of overlords used the highest level evil magic, while the elder black ooze had the ability to corrode weapons and armor, so both were famously hated. But these two weren't monsters. They were players. The races players could choose from in Yggdrasil were split into 3 main categories: basic humanoid races, humans, dwarves, elves, and so on; subhuman races, who weren't pretty but performed better than humanoids, goblins, orcs, ogres, etc., and grotesques, who had monster powers and got more ability points than the other races, but were penalized in other ways. Including all the elite races, there was a total of 700 at the user's disposal. Naturally, overlords and elder black oozes were 2 of the most elite grotesque races that players could become. The overlord spoke without moving his mouth. Even for what had once been the pinnacle of DMMORPGs, it had still been impossible to animate expressions to align with conversation. It's been a really long time, Hero. Even though it's the last day Yggdrasil servers are open. I didn't think you would actually come. For real. Long time no see, Momonga, another adult male voice answered. But compared to the first, it sounded pretty lifeless. It's been since you changed jobs IRL, so how long ago was that? 2 years? Yeah, about that. Jeez, it's been that long. Damn, my sense of time is messed up from working so much overtime. Sounds rough. Are you doing okay? My health? It's pretty much in tatters. Not doctor visit level, but pretty close.
I really just want to run away from it all, but I gotta eat, so I'm working my ass off and getting whipped like a slave.
Yikes. The Overlord Momonga leaned back to exaggerate his wince. This conversation was kind of killing the mood.
It's seriously awful.
Momonga was already put off, but Hirohiro's follow-up sounded exactly as awful as he said things were. Their gripes about their jobs in reality gathered steam, how their subordinates had no communication skills, how the spec documents were liable to change from one day to the next, how their bosses would grill them if they didn't meet their quotas, how they could barely ever go home because there was too much work, their abnormal weight gain caused by the crazy hours they slept, the increasing numbers of pills they took. At some point, it was like a dam broke inside Hirohiro, and Momonga shifted into a listening role as the complaints flooded out. Talking about one's real life in a fantasy world was frowned on by many. Please keep your reality out of my daydream was certainly an understandable sentiment, but these two didn't feel that way. There were two requirements that all members of their guild Ainzul Gon had to meet. One was that members had to be working adults, and the other was that they had to play grotesques. Since that's the type of guild it was, real-life work woes were a common topic of discussion, which was fine with the members. The conversation these two were having was an everyday occurrence in Ainzul Gon. Enough time had passed that Hirohiro's muddy flood of grievances had calmed to a clear stream.
Sorry. I don't mean just to whine, but I can't really talk about this stuff IRL, you know?
A part of him that must have been his head wiggled. Momonga took it as an apology and said,
"Don't worry about it, Hirohiro. You accepted my invitation to come tonight even though you're exhausted, so listening to some complaints is the least I can do. I'll take as many as you got."
Hirohiro seemed a bit livelier than before and gave a weak chuckle.
Huh. Really, though. Thank you, Momonga. I'm glad I was able to log in today and see you after so long.
It makes me glad to hear you say that.
But I should probably get going soon.
Hirohiro's tentacles began moving in midair. He'd opened his menu.
Yeah, it's getting late. Sorry, Momonga.
Momonga paused for a breath as to not betray his emotions.
That's too bad. Time really does fly when you're having fun.
I really wanted to stay till the end, but I'm just too tired.
Yeah, I can imagine. Log out and rest up.
I'm really sorry.
Momonga, no.
Guildmaster, what are your plans?
I think I'll hang around until the forced log out when the servers shut down. There's still some time left, so there's a chance someone else might show up.
I see. Honestly, I was surprised this place still even existed.
Times like this, Momonga was truly grateful that their expressions were fixed. Otherwise, his grimace would have been immediately apparent. In any case, his emotions would have been evident in his voice, so he had to keep his mouth shut to suppress them. Hearing something like that from a guildmate after having worked so hard to maintain their base precisely because it was the place they had all built together elicited feelings in Momonga too mixed to explain. But those feelings vanished when he heard what Hirohiro said next.
As the guildmaster, you kept it going so we could come back any time, didn't you? I really appreciate that.
Well, we all built it together, you know? Making sure members can come back any time is the guildmaster's job.
I think having you as our guildmaster is what made this game so fun for us. I hope to see you again. And Yggdrasil too.
I haven't heard any rumors about a sequel, but yeah, I hope so too.
If it happens, let's definitely play together. Anyhow, I'm falling asleep here, so I'm gonna log off. I'm glad I got to see you at the end like this. It's been great playing with you.
Momonga choked up for just a moment. Then he managed his final goodbye.
I'm glad I got to see you too. Nice playing with you.
A smiley emoticon appeared over Hirohiro's head. In Yggdrasil, expressions didn't change, so players used emoticons when they wanted to convey emotions. Momonga opened his menu and picked the same emoticon. Hirohiro got the last word in.
See you again somewhere.
With that, The last of the 3 other guild members who had made the farewell gathering disappeared. Silence returned to the room. A silence so deep it was hard to imagine anyone had been there. No echoes, no vestiges of anyone's presence. Looking at the chair where Hirohiro had been sitting until a moment before, Momonga murmured the words he suppressed.
I know you're tired, but it's the last day. The servers are shutting down. Won't you stay until the end?
Of course. There was no reply. Hirohiro was already back in the real world. Momonga heaved a sigh from the bottom of his heart. There was no way he could have said that. It had been evident from their short conversation and the tone of Hirohiro's voice how extremely tired he had been. A guy that exhausted had read the email Momonga had sent and came out for the last day. That was more than enough to be thankful for. Any further request would have overstepped the bounds of nostalgia and just made Momonga into a nuisance. Momonga stared at Hirohiro's empty chair, and then shifted his gaze. There were 39 other chairs. The places where his guildmates used to sit. He looked around at all of them before coming back to Hirohiro's seat.
See you again somewhere?
See you again sometime. See you later. He'd heard those words many times, but they almost never came true. Nobody ever returned to Yggdrasil.
Where and when exactly are we going to meet, huh?
Momonga's shoulders shuddered violently, and the true feelings that he had been building up all this time suddenly gushed out.
Don't fuck with me!
He roared, pounding the table with both fists. The game system registered his motion as an attack and began computing countless parameters, such as his unarmed attack strength and the table's defense stats. The result appeared above the place where his hands had struck. 0.
This is the great tomb of Nazarick. We built it together. How can you all abandon it so easily?
After the intense anger came loneliness.
No. I know that's not right. I know it wasn't easy at all. They were just forced to choose between reality and a daydream. It's not something they could help. No one betrayed us at all. It was a hard decision for everybody.
Momonga muttered to himself as he stood up. In the direction he faced, a staff hung on the wall. It was based on the god Hermes' staff, Calicus, and consisted of 7 intertwined snakes. Each writhing snake held a different colored jewel in its mouth. The grip was made of a transparent crystalline material that gave off a pale glow. Anyone who saw it would know it was a top-tier item. It was a guild weapon, so named because each guild could only have one. This staff was the symbol of Ainzul Gon. It was meant to be wielded by the guildmaster, so why was it on display here? Precisely because it was the symbol of the guild. If the guild weapon were destroyed, it would mean the collapse of the guild. So, in most cases, a guild weapon was stored in a safe place, its mighty powers untested. Even a weapon of a top guild like Ainzul Gon was no exception. That was why, even though the staff was made for Momonga, he had never once held it. He reached his hand out, and then stopped himself. Did he really want to taint the glorious memory of all they had built together? Now? At the moment before the server shut down? He recalled the days when the guild members had gone questing together to craft the guild weapon. They had split into teams and competed to see who could collect the most resources, argued about what the design should be, summarized the opinions each member brought to the table, and built it up piece by piece. Those were the glory days of Ainzul Gon. There were people who were tired from work but forced themselves to show up anyway. There were people who slacked on their family obligations, got into a huge fight with their wives. There were people who laughed and said that they took a sick day. Sometimes they wasted a whole day just chatting. They'd get so excited about the silliest things. They'd plan quests and hunt for treasure like there was no tomorrow. Once, they had mounted a sneak attack on a castle that was an enemy guild's base and stormed right in. Once, they were nearly annihilated by one of the strongest secret monsters in the game, known as world enemies. They'd discovered some previously undiscovered resources. They'd positioned all kinds of monsters in their base to take care of any intruders. But now there was no one left. Out of 41 players, 37 had quit. The other 3 had remained members in name, but Momonga couldn't remember the last time they had come before today. Momonga opened the menu to access official data and looked at the guild ranking. Now, there were slightly fewer than 800 guilds. Once they had been ranked 9th, but they had fallen to 29th.
This is our rank on the last day, huh?
The lowest they'd ever been was 48th. That they had only slipped that far was not thanks to Momonga's efforts, but to the items left by former guildmates, what remained of the guild's former glory. It was a wreck now, but it had its heyday, and the fruit of that period was their guild weapon, the Staff of Ainzul Gone. Momonga didn't want to tarnish the memories harbored there, but a rebellious feeling also smoldered within him. Ainzul Gone valued majority rule. Although Momonga's title was Guildmaster, the duties he performed were mostly routine, often communications-type tasks. Maybe that's why now that no one was left, he thought for the first time that he'd like to try claiming a Guildmaster's rights.
Well, I can't do it looking like this,
he muttered, and went into the menu. He would equip himself in a manner befitting a master of a top guild. The gear in Yggdrasil was classified by how much data it contained. The more data, the better the item. Players started off with low-tier gear, then medium-tier, upper-tier, superior-tier, legacy, relic, legend, and finally, god-tier, the highest possible. 9 rings, each with their own power, adorned Momonga's 10 finger bones. His necklace, gauntlets, boots, cape, cloak, and circlet were all god-tier. From a monetary point of view, each item was an astonishingly rare and valuable treasure. The splendid robe mentioned previously hung from his shoulders. A reddish-black aura shimmered up from beneath his feet, giving him an ominous, evil presence. But he wasn't using a skill. The robe data had room, so he just plugged in an ominous aura effect. It wasn't like anything would happen if someone touched it. Out of the corner of his eye, Momonga saw various numbers pop up to indicate his stat increases. Having fully equipped himself, he nodded in satisfaction. Now he looked like a guild master. Then, he reached out and grasped the Staff of Ainzul Gone. The moment it was in his hands, it began radiating a shimmering, dark red aura. Anguished human faces would occasionally form, warp, and dissipate, seemingly so real one could almost hear their tortured cries.
Maybe we went a little overboard.
Finally, on the last day the servers were running, this elite staff was in the hands of its rightful owner. While confirming the icons indicating his dramatic stat boosts, he still felt lonely.
Well, symbol of the guild, shall we see what you can do? Or should I say, symbol of my guild.
This has been an unofficial reading of Overlord, Volume 1. If you would like to see more, please consider subscribing. If you would like to support us, consider pledging to our Patreon at patreon.com/NUMBSKULLS. Thank you for listening.